Have you ever been desperate for God? I mean, like so desperate that if he didn't show up, it's game over. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today on Vintage Truth. But before we hop into this passage here in Mark chapter 7, just a couple of quick things. I want to say thank you for those of you who have reached out to me about this ministry, not only this ministry, but the Prophecy Pros podcast, Jeff Kinley Live, the King is Coming television program, all those that I'm hosting and speaking on, just to say thank you for standing up for God's truth in an age where truth is really up for grabs. And in fact, in the church, I mean, there's things that you say sometimes online, and here come the so-called Christians attacking you just for saying what the Bible says. And my friends, that is alarming that we're in an age like this. It really is just indication of the age of apostasy that we're in, where so many are falling away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons, but we are being committed to the Word of God, not for our own self-exaltation, not for our self-righteousness, simply because we love Jesus and we want to stand with Jesus on what He says in His Word. We can do no other. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, there's going to be a time, and there is a time even now, where everyone's bowing down to certain gods, certain idols. There's the pride and woke idol that's out there right now. There's just the compromise idol. There's the immorality idol. There's whatever. There's so many idols out there. People are bowing down because they're afraid of the backlash if they don't. But you're a Christian, and Christians don't back down and they don't bow down. And so we want to be committed to God's vintage, perfect, and errant truth. And that's why we teach it and preach it through this ministry of mine. So today we're going to jump into Mark chapter 7. And by the way, if you hadn't got my new book, God's Grand Finale, Wrath, Grace, and Glory in Earth's Final Days, you got to get a copy of this book. And here's why. It takes you through the entire book of Revelation, but it highlights the attributes of your God. It shows you how God is through every page of the book of Revelation and what attribute we see Him portraying for us, because as it turns out, God wrote the last book of the Bible, the last book He ever wrote. He wrote it not just to tell us what's going to happen at the end of the world, but to tell us who He is. And the most important thing about us, A.W. Tozer said, is what we think about when we think about God. And so this book helps calibrate your thoughts to an accurate view of the character and attributes of our God. Okay, we're going to jump into Mark chapter 7 today, and we're going to talk about what it means to be desperate for God. Now, this is a point in Jesus' ministry where He is like worn out, okay? And He kind of doesn't want to be around people just because He needs to recharge. He needs to be with his friends and disciples, but He didn't want to be drained by the crowds at the moment. So he goes away to the region of Tyre to kind of get away there. And it says in verse 24, He wanted no one to know of it. He didn't want anybody to know He was there. Listen, to a very minuscule degree, I understand that in my own life sometimes when I've been on the road and I've been speaking and traveling and going here and teaching here and producing this and doing this. And I just need some downtime. I need some quote unquote me time. In other words, time apart from, a bunch of people so that I can just recharge. And so, and that's hard for me sometimes because I love people and I love to be around people. I love to give. And that's why I try to respond to all those emails that you send me. But I don't always get to all of them, just to be honest. But sometimes I need it, you need it, time away so that you can get your batteries recharged. And Jesus was at that point. But it says at the end of verse 24, but after hearing of Him, in verse 24, it says, yet He could not escape notice. So wherever Jesus went, and this is before, people are tweeting and people are texting and people are posting on social media, it was just simply word of mouth. And I find that even today, that word of mouth is still the best way to communicate things to people. Good news, bad news, what's going on, word of mouth. That's why we need to continue to be connected to one another. But it says here, verse 25, but after hearing of Him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at His feet. Now, just pause the movie for a second. Here's this woman, and she has a little daughter. we don't know the age of this little daughter here. I mean, she could have been, 5 years old. She could have been 9 years old. We don't know. But you have to ask the question, how does a little girl get demon possessed? How does that even happen? Now, we don't know how this happened, but it's potentially likely that it came through the religion, the false religion that this woman may have been a part of. She may have brought this demonic influence into her home. Now, again, we're not told that, but if that's true, it certainly does highlight the strategic role that moms and dads have of protecting their children from influences out there in the world. And of course, we can't protect them all, but listen, the world wants to push its agenda on your children. And emphasis here on the word your. They're your children. They're God's children, but they're your children, right? And it is your responsibility as a parent to make sure that bad influences and bad people don't make their way to your kids. And again, we can't protect our kids from everything. I get that. And the older they get, then the more they are able to get up and walk on their own and say no to those influences by themselves. But there's so many things out there that are targeting children right now. Everything from big box stores to social media to predators that would sneak into the schools dressed as women. And the grooming of children, the sexualization of children is rampant right now. Satan is on a holiday playing around with trying to sexualize children. And my friend, he's succeeding at that. And it's all the way up to the White House. The White House is even promoting the sexualization of children with all of this transgender delusion, demonic delusion. But here's the point, that you as a parent need to be smart. You need to be savvy. You need to not give your little kid a cell phone unless the only thing they can do is call you and you call them. Listen, this world is an evil, wicked place. We're not living in a moral neutral zone here. And neither was this lady. This woman here was living in a pagan land, and she likely had a pagan religion. And however this happened, her daughter ends up getting demon possessed. And guess what? She didn't know what to do about it. So she hears about this teacher, this Jewish teacher, this healer, this rabbi, this worker of wonders. And she seeks him out and she finds him. Now let's read on here. It says she immediately came and fell at his feet. Now this obviously signifies a sense of submission, a sense of humility, a sense of saying, hey, I don't have the answer, but I think you do. It's also a way of saying you're in charge. When you fall at someone's feet, you're saying they're in charge. And she was recognizing the fact that she did not deserve something from God. She was not going to name it and claim it. She was not going to demand something of God. She was going to ask him mercifully to help her. Let's see what she says. In verse 26, now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race. Now, Syrophoenician, it says that she was from the region of Tyre and Sidon, which is where Jesus was at the time there. But also, I think it's Matthew or Mark say that she was a Canaanite. Okay, so essentially, she's another race, right? She's a Gentile. She's a non-Jew. Jesus is primarily ministering to the Jews, but here comes this Gentile woman and the Canaanites. We know about the Canaanites from the Old Testament, right? They were Israel's enemies. So this woman has 3 strikes against her. She's a woman. That's one thing in that day, that women did not get the respect that they deserved. Christ, by the way, ended up bringing respect to women. In fact, women were the ones who financially supported Jesus' ministry, the gospel tells us, and Mark's gospel tells us. And then women were the first to see the risen Christ. So you want to elevate somebody in the world, anybody? Let them be the first to see the resurrected Christ. I'd say that makes you pretty important, okay? So, but she was a woman, and that was against her in that culture. She was a Gentile, and she was of potentially a pagan religion. So she had all these things coming against her. Now, the word that's used here that says that she came and fell at his feet is the same word proskuneo, the same word used in the Greek language in the New Testament and in the Gospels to refer to worship. So there's something here that is telling us that she's recognizing that Jesus is worthy to be worshiped. And it says she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now, over in Matthew chapter 15, Matthew 15 and verse 23, I want to read that verse to us here because I think that sheds a little light on what's going on here. Matthew 15, 23, it says, she called him, says, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon possessed." So apparently this demon was abusing her physically. But it says, but he did not answer her a word. In essence, Jesus ignored her. Christ ignored this woman. You say, wow, that's kind of rude for Jesus to do that, right? No, not really. Jesus is doing something here. Jesus is testing her. Jesus wants to know, how bad do you want this? And listen, God sometimes wants us to be at a point of desperation, but the desperation is one thing. It's how bad do you really want it? How bad do you really want God to show up? Sometimes I'll see people who simply on the street corner, they refuse to work for whatever reason, and they're standing there with a sign. And sometimes I think to myself, if you really want money, why don't you go work for it? You obviously are healthy enough to stand up all day long. So couldn't you stand up at a factory or at a restaurant or somewhere else and work? How bad do you really want this thing? Or are you just going to sit back and wait for things to come to you? That's not how life works. And it's not how our life with Jesus works. He wants us to come to him, but he doesn't want us to give up. And we're going to see that lesson through this woman. It says here in Matthew, it says, but she kept asking him. And then the disciples said, they came to him next. It says they kept asking him, send this woman away because she's shouting after us. This woman is annoying. She's getting on our last nerve here, Jesus, and just tell her to go away so that we can hang out with you. And Jesus then turned to the woman in Matthew and he says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And, that's a little item there that Matthew gives us that Mark doesn't give us there. Let's go back to Mark here. It says that, it tells us the woman was a Syrophoenician woman and that she, obviously from that area of Tyre and Sidon. She continued calling out. And then Jesus said to her, after he ignored her, he said this to her. He says, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Now, immediately when you read that, that comes across as being the most insensitive, unkind, and rude thing you could ever say to someone. Jesus, why would you ever say that? Wow. Think about that today. If Jesus said that today, if somebody came to him and he said, hey, it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs, people would just, they'd crucify him. They'd crucify him on social media. They'd crucify him in the news. Then they'd really crucify him. People have this radar today that if you step out of line against the perceived narrative here, they're going to come after you. But wow, this is still, I admit, this is pretty strong language. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find out that Christ is not calling her a dog, okay? The word that Jesus uses there is not the word that the Jews would use when they called Gentiles dogs, because there were two types of dogs in the first century, especially in this area. There were mongrel scavenger dogs, and these were dogs that would attack you. These are dogs that hung out at the city dump. They scavenged on garbage. They carried diseases. There's the dogs that you wanted. They traveled in packs. You didn't want to be around these kind of dogs. They're horrible. And if you really wanted to insult someone, you called them that kind of dog. This is a different word. The word Jesus used here was for the other kind of dog, which meant the household pet, the beloved pet. Just like some of you guys that are watching this right now, you guys love your dogs. It's your pets, right? Some of you guys probably love them too much. It's like they get treatment that nobody else gets, right? But this is the word that Jesus is using here. He's saying in this illustration, he's simply saying that I've come to minister to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are my priority. And so he's not calling her a dog. He's just simply saying that the children first need to be satisfied. So not saying I won't get to you as a Gentile, but right now I'm ministering to the Jews. Well, that answer wasn't good enough for her. And good on her for that. You know why? Because she's desperate. She's desperate for God, right? Look what she does next in verse 28 rather. It says, but she answered and said to him, yes, Lord. So she agreed. Okay, I'll give you that, Jesus. Granted, the children get fed first and then the dogs. But she said, even the dogs under the table feed on the children's scraps. Boom. I mean, that was a literal mic drop moment there. And the reason why was because she was evidencing here a level of persistence and a level of faith that Jesus had not seen. And, now, on the one hand, we think Jesus is uncaring, he's racist, he's chauvinistic, he's aloof, but now she's coming back and saying, I'm gonna not leave because I'm here to get what I want. You know why? Because she is desperate and because she loves her daughter. Sometimes in our Christian lives, granted, we too hear the silence of heaven, don't we? We come to God, we have a need, maybe it's a desperate need, and we come to God just like he told us to. Guess what? Nothing. I mean, heavenly crickets, right? And all of a sudden we're just like, well, I thought you cared about me. And now nothing is happening. I pray, nothing happens. I keep praying, nothing happens. God, where are you? Have you left me? Have you abandoned me? Did I do something that has caused you to not want to answer my prayer? What's going on? So, we get the silence of heaven sometimes just like she did. How would you have responded if Christ had just simply looked the other way? You would have obviously interpreted that as, well, he's not interested. He doesn't care. I'm hurt. I'm disappointed. Maybe you're angry at God. Maybe you're embarrassed, confused. Maybe you're bitter or resentful. I don't know. But Christ completely ignored her until she kept on. And then she said, Lord, even the dogs get a little crumbs every now and then. Now, I'll tell you, what I love about this woman is that she was motivated. Now, all of us in life experience similar things, right? And we all have similar needs and desires and wants and dreams and goals and all these things that happen to us. The question is, where do you go when these things happen to you? I'm not talking about not just the thing like your daughter's demon possessed. I'm talking about the little things in life, the things in life that are just the minor irritants that just kind of wear on you throughout a day. What do you take those things? Do you take them to God? Do you dump them on his shoulders? Do you roll your burden like 1 Peter 5 verses 7 and 8 says to do? It's just we cast our cares upon him because he cares for us. And even when he's silent, do you keep going back? Here's a woman who's a pagan, okay? She's a pagan from a pagan religion, but she's continuing to come back. She will not take no for an answer. Just like the woman in the parable Jesus told where she came at midnight and kept knocking on the door. And finally, just to get rid of her, the owner in the illustration said, all right, here's what you need, right? Well, God wants us to be persistent because sometimes God is doing something in us through that. If God just gave us everything we wanted the first time we ever asked for it, or whenever we asked for anything, it just poof, it appeared, what would that do? I mean, that would make us feel entitled. After a while, we would start to expect certain things from God, right? This woman knew she didn't deserve anything from God. But she continued to go to Jesus because she was driven by her love for her daughter, her desperation, and watch this now, her belief that only Jesus could help her. Only Jesus could help her. You know, when you get to a point in your life where all you have left, I mean, it's all been stripped away. Your finances, your friendships, your future, your self-esteem, it's gone. You have nothing. You've been stripped bare. When you get to the point in life where all you have is Jesus, that might be the best place in the world to be. Because when you find out that Jesus is all you need, then that's when Christ comes and he shows up and he meets the need that you have. Look what happened in this story. She kept after Christ, and he finally says this to her. He says, because of this answer, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter. Now, back over in Matthew chapter 15 and verse 28, listen to what he says to her there. And this is Matthew's expanded account here, okay? He says, but Jesus answered to her, O woman, your faith is great. You know, there's only 2 times in the New Testament where Jesus called someone's faith great. And both of them, by the way, were Gentiles. One was a Roman officer, and the other was this woman right here. Oh, woman, go your way. Your faith is great. Jesus was he marveled at her faith. He was amazed at her faith. He loved her faith. Don't you want Jesus to love your faith? Don't you want him to look at you and go, that's what I'm talking about right there. You are willing to trust me in the most desperate moments of your life. In fact, you're willing to be in a desperate moment. You're willing to pursue a desperate moment. You know, maybe God's launching you out on a new business, or he's causing you to pull your kids out of a school. And you're going, how are we going to do it? How are we going to put them in Christian private school? We can't afford that. No, neither can we. But it was a desperate moment. And, you know, we knew that for our kids, we had to make a lot of sacrifices. We put ourselves purposefully in desperate situations so that we could do what God had asked us to do in a world that's against us. And there were many times when there was silence from heaven. And there are many times raising our kids where you got down to the last moment and God shows up. And, you know, there are times, and, you know, people think that, you know, when you have a ministry and it's a national, worldwide ministry, that, you know, all your needs are always met. But what people don't see is the way that you have persevered through very, very difficult times, only because you believe God had called you to something. And I remember one night at dinner, we simply were out of money. This was back when we were raising our kids, and they're all grown now, but we were sitting at dinner and we literally had no food, no money. And we just simply said, all right, God, we're here with nothing left. We need some crumbs to fall from the table, you know, to the dogs down here, right? And in that moment, that very moment, we heard something outside. It was the clank of a mailbox closing. And obviously it was at night. Mailboxes don't open and close at night, right? So we went outside, opened the mailbox. Inside was an envelope with a stack of cash in there. No note, no signature, just appeared in the mailbox. And we had not broadcast our need to anyone. You know, when you're desperate, sometimes God has to show up just to say, I'm here. I'm going to take care of you. And, you know, we're all at different stages of our lives having to trust God for different things. Maybe it's not a personal need like a family member, or maybe it is. Maybe you have a wayward child. Maybe your child is into some stuff that is demonic. You know, maybe you have friends or family or you know, relatives or whatever that that need Jesus desperately at this moment, are you going to give up praying for them? Are you going to give up going to Jesus? Are you going to give up falling at his feet? Are you going to give up saying, I'm not leaving here until I get what I want? You're going to be like Jacob, who wrestled with the angel of the Lord. You're going to wrestle with God a little bit? Okay, do it. You know why? Because God says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, without faith it is impossible to please him. You want to exercise your faith in God every single day. Ask him for some big stuff. He may not give you everything you want because he knows what you really need. But in a situation like this, Jesus didn't turn her away. And at the end of this thing here, this great story, it says in verse 30, going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having departed. Now, can we just say this? How amazing is Jesus that he could just say, it's gone. He just commanded the demon from a distance to leave the child. He overpowered and outranked the demon and just made the demon leave her. Jesus has the power to do that. I don't think this little girl in that situation knew how to call on Jesus, but Jesus knew how to call that demon out. And he literally called the demon out, and he called the demon out. And the demon left. And this woman came home and found out that her great faith in Jesus had paid off. And listen, there's a lot of things in life right now that we can all trust God for. Here's what I want to tell you today. Do not ever give up on your faith. And do not ever stop believing that the only real answer to all of your problems and my problems is Jesus Christ himself. Run to him. Go to him. Be desperate for him every day. And you know what? That doesn't mean all the pain goes away, but it does mean you get to spend time at his feet. And while you're there, while you're also asking him for things, take some time out just to adore him and to worship him and to tell him how incredibly great he is. How do we see ourselves in this woman? Well, listen, we're all going to be in moments like this at some point in our lives. Her great faith reached out and literally touched the heart of Jesus that moved his hand. Her great faith reached out, touched the heart of Jesus that moved his hand. I think of Psalm 40, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, making my footsteps firm. And he put a new song in my mouth, a new praise to our God. And many will see and fear and will trust in the Lord. You persevere for however long you need to. But whatever you do, don't let go of Jesus. You know why? Because he's definitely never going to let go of you. Hey, thanks for watching and listening to the Vintage Truth Podcast. I'll have a new message for you next time. Until then, stay with Jesus.